When I told my parents the $20 million from my company sale was gone, I expected panic. Instead, my mother asked, "Did you sign the final ownership confirmations?" They demanded I sign papers that night. My lawyer, Nathan Rourke, ordered me to make that call because he knew they were waiting for me to be weak. Their secret was not about my startup, but a buried family property no one ever told me I controlled. My name is Alexandra Baldwin. I am 34 years old, born in the crisp, thin air of Colorado, and for the last 7 years, I have had no life outside of a logistics software company I built from nothing called Asterloop Metrics. I gave up my 20s and the first half of my 30s for this company. There were no vacations to the coast. There were no meaningful romantic relationships. There were only endless lines of code, venture capital pitches in sterile rooms, and a relentless obsession with supply chain efficiencies that alienated anyone who did not understand the brutal daily grind of a founder. Today was supposed to be the absolute finish line. We had just closed the acquisition. The wire transfer was scheduled to hit my accounts by the end of the business day, a life-altering sum of $20 million. I sat in the glass-walled conference room of my legal counsel, staring at the polished mahogany table, waiting for the massive, overwhelming rush of relief. It did not come. Instead of pouring champagne or offering a handshake, my lead attorney, Nathan Rourke, closed his laptop with a quiet, definitive snap. Nathan was a man who rarely smiled, a meticulous guardian of contracts who possessed a sharp, calculating intelligence. He had guided me through the most treacherous corporate negotiations of my career, but I had never seen him look as grave as he did in this moment. "Do not celebrate yet, Alexandra," he said, his voice completely flat. I looked up, my pulse suddenly thrumming heavily in my ears. I asked him what was wrong, terrified there was a sudden regulatory holdup or a hidden compliance issue that was about to kill the deal. He shook his head slowly. "I need you to do something strange. I need you to call your parents right now. Tell them the money is gone." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. There was none. He leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the table, holding my gaze. "Tell them the proceeds are tied up in a catastrophic escrow failure. Tell them the buyer's accounts were frozen and that you might be personally exposed to crippling liabilities. Sell the panic." I demanded an immediate explanation. Why on earth would I terrorize my family on the single best day of my professional life? Nathan refused to break eye contact. "I will explain everything after you hang up. But I cannot show you what I found until you see their reactions for yourself. Make the call." "Alexandra." My hands shook as I picked up my phone. I dialed my mother. Celeste. It rang exactly 3 times. I expected her to answer with the breathless excitement she had been projecting for the past 6 months, ever since the acquisition rumors leaked to her wealthy country club friends. "Alexandra," she answered, her tone brisk and expecting good news. "Are we officially celebrating?" I squeezed my eyes shut, channeling the sheer exhaustion of the past 7 years, and let my voice crack. "Mom, it is gone. The money is gone." Silence stretched over the line, a heavy, suffocating dead air. I waited for the sharp gasp. I waited for the panicked motherly instinct to kick in. The desperate human question asking if I was okay, if I was safe, if I needed a place to sleep tonight. "What do you mean, gone?" she asked. Her voice had dropped an entire octave. The maternal warmth vanished instantly, replaced by an absolute, freezing calculus. "There was a catastrophic escrow failure," I stammered, reading the script Nathan had hastily written on a yellow legal pad. "The buyer's holding accounts were compromised by a federal hold. The deal collapsed, and they are saying I might be personally exposed to the breach liabilities. I have nothing. Mom, I might be in massive debt." Another long stretch of silence. I looked across the table at Nathan. He was watching me with a terrible, patient sadness. "Listen to me very carefully, Alexandra," my mother finally said. There was no tremor of sympathy in her voice. "Did you already sign all final ownership confirmations for the sale?" I blinked, entirely thrown off balance by the coldness of the inquiry. "What, Mom? I just told you I lost everything." I might lose my apartment. Did you sign the ownership confirmations? Alexandra, she repeated, sharper this time, her tone turning entirely transactional. Yes or no? I do not know, I whispered, the shock radiating through my chest now entirely genuine. I think so. Stay exactly where you are, she commanded. Do not speak to the press. Do not speak to anyone? The line went dead. She hung up without saying goodbye. She hung up without asking if I was okay. Before I could even lower the phone from my ear, the screen lit up with a text message from my father. Dean. My father was a man who communicated in gruff directives, a man who viewed the world strictly through a lens of asset management, leverage, and reputation preservation. The text arrived exactly 45 seconds after my mother ended the call. It did not say he loved me. It did not say they were coming to help me through this crisis. It read, "Do not speak to any outsiders. If the situation is as bad as your mother says, come to the club alone tonight. We need to contain the damage. Contain the damage, not comfort my daughter, not help my child. Contain the damage." I turned the phone around and showed the screen to Nathan. He nodded slowly, sliding a fresh legal pad and a pen across the table toward me. Write down every unusual phrase they use, Nathan said softly. Write down the exact timeline of who contacts you first. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently against the wood. An incoming call from my younger brother, Mason. Mason had not called me on a weekday in 4 years unless he needed seed money for a failed restaurant venture or a favor he wanted kept off our parents' radar. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a notification popped up. I put the phone on speaker and hit play. Lex! Mason's voice spilled out into the quiet room, frantic, breathless, and entirely devoid of any sibling concern. Mom just called me. Tell me this is a joke. If your accounts are frozen, what happens to the collateral? More importantly, can you still authorize the Savannah file, Lex? Call me back right now. If the Savannah file is locked up with your escrow mess, we are entirely screwed. The message ended, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I sat frozen in the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the conference room. I had never heard of any Savannah file. I had never owned property or conducted business in Georgia. I had never authorized anything related to collateral outside of the operational limits of Astor Loop metrics. What is the Savannah file? I asked Nathan, my voice barely above a whisper, my hands gripping the edge of the table. That, Nathan said, leaning back in his leather chair, is exactly why I asked you to make the call. He opened his laptop again, his fingers flying across the keys to refresh his inbox. At that exact moment, my phone pinged with a new email notification. It was not from a family member, but from Cynthia, the perpetually panicked assistant who managed my parents' private family office. In her frantic haste, she had clicked the reply all button instead of forwarding an urgent directive exclusively to my father. The subject line glared at me from the illuminated screen, stark and terrifying. It read, "Forward urgent. Emergency disclaimer draft. A. Baldwin's signature required." I opened the email with trembling fingers. The body text was a frantic scramble from Cynthia to my father, Dean. If Alexandra's personal assets are compromised by the software collapse, the attorneys say we have less than 2 hours to sever her from the holdings before her creditors can attach to the real estate. Should I send the courier to her office with the disclaimer draft immediately? The breath left my lungs. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet by 20 degrees. The realization hit me not as a wave of sorrow, but as a sickening, physical blow to the stomach. For the first time today, I understood what was actually happening. Nathan had not asked me to lie about losing the $20 million to test my family's loyalty. He had not asked me to create drama for the sake of some bizarre psychological exercise. He had asked me to fake a financial collapse to expose a massive, coordinated plan that was already in motion. This hidden machinery, these mysterious documents, this Savannah file, none of this was drawn up in the last 15 minutes. an emergency disclaimer draft, requiring my immediate signature could not be generated and reviewed by their corporate counsel in the time it took my mother to hang up the phone. This ambush had been prepared long before I walked into Nathan's office. My family had been waiting for the exact moment they believed I was weak. They had been waiting for a disaster, or perhaps they had been planning to manufacture one themselves. They were not rushing to protect me from my own professional failure. They were rushing to protect something incredibly valuable from me, using my supposed tragedy as the perfect weapon to blindside me into signing away my own rights. I looked up from the phone, the naive, exhausted tech founder burning away in the cold, fluorescent light of the legal suite. I looked across the table at the lawyer who had just saved my life. "Show me what you found," I said. Nathan turned his laptop toward me. The screen displayed a dizzying array of scanned corporate filings, highlighted in bright yellow blocks. At the top of the foremost document, a stylized seal read, "Baldwin Maritime Holdings. While we were structuring your tax liabilities for the Astor Loop sale last month," Nathan began, his tone even and deliberate, entirely devoid of the dramatic flair a lesser lawyer might use. "I ran a standard deep dive asset check. I needed to ensure there were no dormant family trusts or overlapping corporate entities that the federal auditors could flag during the payout phase. I expected to find nothing but clean air. Instead, I found this buried beneath 3 layers of corporate shielding." He tapped the screen. "Aunt Laurel," I breathed, reading the name of the managing director listed on the original formation charter. My Aunt Laurel had passed away 5 years ago. She was the family eccentric, a woman who lived in cardigans and smelled of loose-leaf tea, vastly different from my aggressively corporate parents. She never attended the country club galas. She never cared about optics. I thought she had left nothing behind but a collection of antique clocks and a modest life insurance policy. "Laurel Baldwin established this entity exactly 12 years ago," Nathan explained, bringing up a topographical map of the Georgia coastline. "During a severe market downturn, she quietly began assembling purchase options on neglected riverfront warehouses and utility corridors in Savannah. At the time, they were practically worthless. Unimpressive, rusting hulks of industrial decay sitting on muddy water. Your father and mother likely thought it was another one of her eccentric wastes of capital. They ignored it completely." He zoomed in on the map. Thick red borders highlighted the specific parcels Laurel had bought. They formed a continuous, jagged line along the river, but markets shift, and geographic value changes. Nathan continued, tracing the red line with his pen. "Over the past 36 months, the municipal government finalized a massive port expansion. More importantly, a global tech conglomerate is currently building a sprawling data center corridor right through this exact zone. The subterranean utility easements beneath those decaying warehouses are now the absolute choke point for the entire regional power grid and fiber optic routing. Those unimpressive parcels are now one of the most strategic real estate bundles on the entire East Coast." I stared at the red lines, my mind struggling to pivot from software logistics to commercial real estate. "How much are they worth?" Nathan did not blink. "If bundled and controlled correctly, conservatively, they are worth double your startup sale, perhaps triple. We are looking at $50 million to $60 million. Which is exactly why someone has been frantically trying to clean up the title over the last 6 months before a redevelopment deal closes." My mind raced. But if Laurel owned them, and she died, did they not pass to my father? He was the executor of her estate. Nathan smiled, a tight, humorless expression. "That is what your father assumed. Laurel let him assume it. But Laurel drafted a very specific, deeply hidden succession clause in the core operating agreement of Baldwin Maritime Holdings. She did not name your father, Dean. She did not name your mother, Celeste. And she certainly did not name your brother, Mason." He pulled up another document, a dense block of legal text with a single paragraph highlighted. My name was sitting squarely in the middle of it. "Laurel named you as the replacement manager," Nathan said. "But the clause had a strict trigger condition. You would only assume control if Laurel died, and any member of the Baldwin family was found engaging in self-dealing or actively mismanaging the holding company. Self-dealing? I repeated, the legal term feeling heavy and toxic in my mouth. Using company assets for personal gain, Nathan clarified. Borrowing against the properties to fund lifestyle expenses or failing business ventures. Treating a protected trust like a personal checking account. Does that sound like anyone you know? Mason? His endless string of failed boutique restaurants? The luxury cars? The lavish lifestyle my parents funded without question to keep up appearances. They borrowed against it, I realized, the puzzle pieces snapping together with violent clarity. Nathan nodded, his expression darkening. They did significantly more than borrow. I pulled the refinancing documents filed in Chatham County over the past 2 years. Your father and brother have leveraged those properties to the absolute brink, likely to keep Mason from defaulting on his commercial loans. But to refinance a holding company, to pledge those warehouses as collateral, you need the explicit, notarized consent of the named manager. But I never signed anything, I said, my voice rising, vibrating with a sudden, sharp anger. I did not even know this company existed until 3 minutes ago. Nathan slid a thick, physical manila folder across the table. I opened it. Inside were a dozen signature pages, my signature. Or rather, a perfectly executed, practiced imitation of my signature, stamped and sealed by a registered notary public. I ran the notary dates against your credit card statements and travel logs, Nathan said quietly, watching me process the betrayal. On the 14th of October last year, when this massive commercial loan was supposedly ratified by you in person in Colorado, you were in Tokyo negotiating a supply chain integration for Asterloop. You were physically thousands of miles away. It is impossible for you to have signed this. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me. Forgery. My own family had forged my signature to secure millions of dollars in loans against an asset they did not legally control. They are trapped in a burning building of their own making, Nathan said, leaning forward, his voice dropping into a register of pure tactical analysis. The data center redevelopment deal is closing soon. The buyers require a perfectly clean title to transfer the funds. That means an army of corporate lawyers is about to scrub every document, every signature, and every loan agreement tied to Baldwin Maritime. When they do, they will discover the fraudulent loans and the forged ratifications. Your parents have been trying to use a mix of subtle family pressure, forged documents, and selective disclosures to erase your rights entirely before you ever learn what you actually own. I looked down at the notes I had scribbled on the yellow pad just moments ago. Mason leaving a voicemail asking about the Savannah file. Cynthia forwarding the panicked email mentioning the emergency disclaimer draft. The phone call, I whispered, looking back up at him. The fake financial collapse. Exactly, Nathan replied. I needed to force their next move. I needed to see their playbook. It was a test of their immediate priorities. If they loved you, if they actually cared about your well-being, a loss of $20 million would trigger an immediate rescue response. They would rush to protect you. But if they feared losing control of this hidden empire, if they knew they had committed felony fraud, a sudden crisis on your end would terrify them for a completely different reason. He pointed at the printed email from Cynthia sitting on the table. If you go bankrupt, Nathan explained, your creditors will tear through your assets. During discovery, those creditors will inevitably find your legal standing as the manager of Baldwin Maritime Holdings. Your parents realized that your imaginary financial ruin would expose their very real, very illegal real estate scheme to outside lawyers. They needed to sever you from the entity immediately. Tonight, I closed the folder. The weight of the betrayal settled deep into my bones, replacing the initial shock with something much heavier. For 7 years, I had spent every waking hour away from them, building my own life, believing their distance was just the natural byproduct of my obsession with work. I had justified their coldness. I had thought they just did not understand me. Now that the truth was laid bare in black ink and forged signatures. So what happens tonight? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The daughter who wanted their approval was dead. The founder who ruthlessly dismantled inefficient systems was wide awake. When you walk into that family meeting, Nathan warned, his eyes locked onto mine. They will not offer you comfort. They will orchestrate a high-pressure environment. They will either try to make you fund their hidden debt using whatever leverage they think they still have, or more likely, they will place a dense stack of papers in front of you. They will tell you it is to protect you from your new creditors. In reality, it will be the one thing standing between them and a much larger payday. They will demand you sign away your rights, your inheritance, and your leverage, all under the guise of family solidarity. I stood up from the mahogany table, leaving the forged documents where they lay. Prepare the counterfilings. Nathan, I said, I'm going to a family meeting. If a family wants to comfort a child who has just lost everything, they invite her to her childhood home. They make tea. They sit on a worn couch and offer a shoulder to cry on. They do not summon her to the private dining wing of the Baldwin Harbor Club. When the valet took my car at 8 o'clock that evening, the heavy humidity of the harbor felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I walked through the mahogany-paneled lobby, past the oil paintings of local maritime founders, and approached the double doors of the Commodore room. I took one deep breath, arranging my features into a mask of absolute devastation, and pushed the heavy oak doors open. The staging of the room was impeccable, a masterclass in controlled negotiation masquerading as an intervention. No one was sitting close to one another. There was no warmth, no open arms. My mother, Celeste, sat at the head of the polished conference table, her hands folded over a silk scarf, wearing a practiced expression of solemn grief. My father, Dean, sat to her right, his posture stiff and formal, like a senior executive preparing to close a hostile corporate takeover. My younger brother, Mason, was pacing the length of the oriental rug near the heavy velvet curtains, his jaw tight with impatient entitlement, checking the gold watch on his wrist every 30 seconds. But it was the fourth person in the room that made the blood freeze in my veins. Sitting quietly in the corner, organizing a stack of manila folders, was Judith Harlan. She was the family-certified public accountant. Her presence was the absolute proof of my lawyer's theory. You do not secure a top-tier accountant for an impromptu family crisis on a Thursday evening unless she was already booked for this exact time, carrying documents that had been drafted days, perhaps weeks, in advance. "Alexandra, darling," my mother said softly as I took a seat opposite my father. She did not stand up to hug me. She did not ask if I had eaten. This is simply tragic. Just a tragic turn of events. I slumped my shoulders, playing the part of the broken daughter. I do not know what to do. Mom. I waited for the natural follow-up. How did it happen? Who is responsible? Are you safe? Do you need money for rent instead? Celeste smoothed her silk scarf and leaned forward, her tone shifting seamlessly from maternal sorrow to corporate risk management. We have to think about the broader implications. Sweetheart, she said, her voice steady and smooth. We have to think about reputation. If these buyers froze the escrow, and the transaction collapsed so publicly, the creditors will be circling by tomorrow morning. We must prioritize confidentiality and speed. We have to insulate you, and by extension, the family name, before the financial press gets hold of this mess. My father did not waste time with introductory sympathies. He reached out and slid a thick-bound folder across the smooth table. It stopped precisely an inch from my hands. I looked down at the heavy cardstock cover. The title, printed in bold, black serif font, read, Emergency Release and Mutual Protection Agreement. We had corporate counsel draft this the moment we heard the news, my father said. His voice was a flat, unyielding baritone. It is a temporary shield, a firewall. It legally separates your current financial liabilities from the broader family trusts while you recover from this loss. It protects you from being targeted for assets you do not actually own. I opened the folder. The paper felt heavy and expensive. To an untrained eye, or to a panicked woman who had just watched her life's work evaporate. It might have looked like a lifeline. But I had spent the last 7 years reading dense software procurement contracts and venture capital term sheets. I knew how to read the fine print. More importantly, I knew exactly what I was looking for. I skimmed past the boilerplate indemnification clauses and found the core of the document buried on the 4th page. My eyes tracked over the dense legal terminology, translating the predatory intent hidden within the elegant phrasing. By signing the document, I would irrevocably disclaim any current or future interest in Baldwin Maritime Holdings. I would permanently waive my right to audit or review the financials of any family-managed corporate entity. And most damning of all, there was a tiny, seemingly innocuous, retroactive clause nested in the 7th paragraph. It stated that I formally acknowledged and ratified all prior financial instruments, loans, and liens executed by the managing partners on my behalf over the past 48 months. It was a blanket pardon. It was a complete erasure of my authority. If I signed my name at the bottom of the last page, I would be legally validating their hidden loans and voluntarily handing over the keys to a massive real estate empire, all while thanking them for saving me. I kept my eyes glued to the paper, letting the silence stretch in the room. I needed to act overwhelmed. I let my breathing grow shallow. "This is so much legal jargon," I whispered, rubbing my temples. "I cannot process this right now. The escrow failure only happened a few hours ago. Can we not look at this next week?" The moment I suggested a delay, the atmosphere in the room snapped. The social claustrophobia intensified, thick and suffocating. Mason stopped his pacing and whipped around to face me, his composure shattering completely. "Next week is too late. Lex," Mason snapped, stepping aggressively toward the table. The developer was promised clean authority by Monday. If we do not have the ratifications filed by tomorrow morning, the bridge financing collapses, and we are all completely exposed. The room went dead silent. Mason had just handed me the smoking gun. A developer. Clean authority by Monday. He had just confirmed out loud that they were actively closing a real estate deal I supposedly knew nothing about, and they desperately needed my signature to finalize it before the weekend. My father shot Mason a look of pure venomous rage, a silent command to shut his mouth. Then, Dean turned his gaze back to me. The mask of the protective patriarch was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating hostility I had never seen directed at me before. "Your brother is simply stressed," my father said, his tone turning to ice. "But he is not wrong about the urgency. Look at yourself. Alexandra, you are spiraling. If you truly lost your money today through your own lack of oversight, then you are clearly in no position to make complicated ownership decisions regarding family assets. You failed to protect your own company. You need to trust the family to stabilize things. Sign the document." He tapped a silver pen against the edge of the folder. It sounded like a gavel striking wood. I looked at my mother, who stared back with blank, unforgiving eyes. I looked at the family accountant, who kept her gaze fixed firmly on her own shoes, fully complicit in the theft. Finally, I looked at my father, the man who was actively trying to exploit my darkest hour to cover up his own financial crimes. This was not a rescue. This was not an intervention to save a drowning daughter. This was not even a betrayal born from a moment of sudden panic. It was a highly coordinated, meticulously planned execution. They had assumed I was too obsessed with my software company to ever look at the fine print of my own family history. They assumed I would be so broken by the loss of my startup that I would blindly sign away my true inheritance just to feel safe. They assumed I would never see them coming. I picked up the silver pen, feeling its heavy, cool metal against my skin, and looked directly into my father's eyes. I held the silver pen suspended above the thick paper. My hand trembled, a completely involuntary physical reaction that played perfectly into their expectations. I dropped the pen intentionally. It clattered sharply against the polished mahogany table. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. "I cannot breathe," I gasped, pressing a hand tightly to my chest. "I just need a minute." I need air. Before my father could protest or issue another command, I grabbed the heavy folder and stepped backward toward the double doors. I am going to read this in the hall. Give me 2 minutes. I slipped through the doors and let them swing shut. Instantly, the performance dropped. My breathing steadied into a slow, controlled rhythm. I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket, opened the secure encrypted messaging application Nathan and I utilized for corporate communications, and began photographing the pages. Flash off, high resolution. Every single page. Every buried clause. Every hidden trap. I sent them in a rapid-fire stream over the cellular network. As the final image uploaded, I leaned my shoulder gently against the heavy oak door. The acoustic dampening in the Baldwin Harbor Club was expensive, but it was not absolute. Through the narrow gap where the doors met, I could hear the low, strained murmur of voices from the private dining room. "She is stalling," my father muttered, his voice tight with irritation. Then came the calm, measured voice of Judith Harlan, the family accountant. "Let her breathe. Dean, if she flatlines and refuses to sign the release tonight, we pivot. We will just use the capacity affidavit package. It is already prepared for filing in the morning." A chill significantly colder than the circulating air conditioning washed over the back of my neck. Capacity affidavit package. They were not just planning to steal the Savannah properties through a forged signature. If I refused to cooperate gracefully, they had already drafted the legal documents to declare me mentally unfit, financially unstable, and legally impaired. They were going to use my staged breakdown against me in a court of law to forcibly remove my managing authority over my aunt's estate. My phone vibrated violently against my palm. A secure call from Nathan. I answered immediately, pressing the speaker tightly to my ear so no sound would escape. "I am reviewing the scans right now," Nathan said, his voice a low, rapid clip of pure tactical analysis. "Do not sign a single page. It is infinitely worse than we initially modeled. They are not just stripping your inheritance. Section 4 attempts to make you retroactively liable for over $11 million in redevelopment debt. If you sign that document, they take the clean assets, and you personally take the commercial mortgage." I closed my eyes. $11 million. It was a financial death sentence designed to ensure I would never have the resources to fight them in civil court. "There is something else," Nathan continued, the pace of his words quickening with sudden realization. "Look at the indemnification preamble on page 2. There is a very specific, highly specialized legal phrase regarding the structural termination of your software acquisition. It references a deficiency in the buyer collateral network." "I see it," I whispered into the receiver. "What does it mean?" "It means you have a mole," Nathan stated flatly. That exact phrasing was used during a closed-door, buyer-side negotiation last Tuesday. It was never released to the public. The only people who knew those specific words were in the executive suite at Astorloop. Someone from your inner business circle leaked confidential transaction data directly to your family. My stomach dropped as the scale of the conspiracy widened. "Who?" "That is exactly what you are going to find out," Nathan instructed. "Go back inside. Look directly at your father. Ask him one simple question. Ask him who told them the sale proceeds were frozen in escrow." "We never released that phrase publicly. I fed that exact lie to you just a few hours ago. If they drafted these documents days in advance, someone from your company gave them the projected closing timeline and the vulnerabilities to exploit. Flush them out." I ended the call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, gripped the folder tightly, and pushed the heavy doors open. The room fell completely silent the second I crossed the threshold. My mother adjusted her posture, offering a weak, supportive smile. My father looked up, expectant, waiting for me to surrender. I walked back to the conference table, but I did not sit down. I tossed the folder onto the polished wood. It slid to a halt, right in front of my father, the silver pen rolling away off the edge. "I have one question," I said, my voice entirely devoid of the panic I had feigned earlier. I sounded exactly like the chief executive officer I was. Who told you my sale proceeds were frozen in escrow? The sudden shift in my tone caught them entirely off guard. The room went dangerously still. My father's eyes narrowed, sensing the trap but unable to see the mechanism. Alexandra, my mother started, attempting to inject a soothing tone back into the physical space. We are simply reacting to the tragic news you told us on the phone. No, I cut her off sharply, my voice echoing off the paneled walls. This folder was printed before I called you. This meeting was scheduled before I called you. The phrase frozen in escrow was never released to the financial press. It was never stated by the buyer. It is an internal operational term. So I will ask you again. Who gave you the closing schedule for my company? My father opened his mouth, likely to pivot the conversation toward a new threat, but Mason, standing near the heavy velvet curtains, possessed absolutely none of Dean's tactical restraint. Mason had spent his entire life coasting on easy answers and zero accountability. The sudden application of pressure cracked him instantly. Travis told us. Okay, Mason blurted out, his voice loud and defensive. Travis said the deal was incredibly fragile. He said you were unstable and ignoring operational risks. We were just preparing for the worst-case scenario. Mason, shut your mouth, my father hissed, his face flushing dark red with uncontrolled fury, but the damage was permanently done. Travis Keene, my chief operating officer, the man who had sat across from me for 4 years, building Astor Loop metrics from a raw concept into a dominant logistics platform, the man I had trusted with complete access to my financial calendars, my legal strategy, and my personal schedule. He had sold me out. Travis had coordinated with my family, timing their predatory pressure campaign perfectly to coincide with the exact moment I was supposed to be celebrating my acquisition. The betrayal was absolute, cutting viciously across both my bloodline and my business. I looked at my father, then at Mason, and finally at Judith, who was suddenly intensely interested in the blank notepad resting in front of her. I am not signing your papers, I said calmly. I leaned over and picked up the thick folder, tucking it firmly under my arm. It was no longer a threat. It was evidence. You cannot leave with those documents, my father said, half rising from his leather chair, his voice dropping the facade of fatherly concern entirely. It was a raw, naked command. Alexandra, sit down. If you attempt to stop me from walking out that door, I replied, maintaining unbroken, freezing eye contact with him, I will immediately dial the police and tell them I am being held against my will by a group of individuals attempting to commit commercial fraud. Have a wonderful evening. I turned and walked out of the Commodore room. I did not run. I did not look back. I marched through the mahogany lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor, and stepped out into the humid night air. The valet rushed to bring my car around. I climbed inside, locked the doors securely, and drove slowly toward the exit of the parking structure. Before pulling onto the main street, I pulled into a shadowed spot near the exit ramp and killed the headlights, watching the illuminated entrance of the club through my rearview mirror. Less than 10 minutes later, a black delivery van screeched into the circular driveway. A courier leaped out of the driver's seat, hauling 2 heavy cardboard banker boxes. He rushed up the concrete steps and disappeared into the lobby. They were bringing in the backup files, the capacity affidavit package Judith had whispered about in the hallway. They were scrambling. Their easy, bloodless victory had just gone up in flames. They thought they were dealing with a broken, grieving daughter who would hand over millions of dollars just for a comforting hug. They had absolutely no idea what kind of war they had just started. By 8 o'clock the following morning, Nathan had already moved to paralyze their timeline. Working through a highly secure contact at a major commercial title company, he filed a formal notice of dispute regarding the chain of custody for Baldwin Maritime Holdings. It was a highly technical, aggressive maneuver, effectively freezing any transfer of ownership or lien application that relied on my supposed ratification. It would not hold them off forever. Nathan estimated we had bought ourselves a narrow window of perhaps 72 hours before my father's expensive legal team could untangle the freeze and file an emergency injunction. We had to use every single minute of that window to investigate exactly what they were trying to steal. At precisely 12 noon, Nathan drove me to a quiet, unassuming coffee shop on the industrial outskirts of the city. Waiting for us in a dimly lit corner booth was a woman with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Her hands were wrapped tightly around a thick ceramic mug, her knuckles pale. "Alexandra," Nathan said softly as we slid into the booth opposite her. "I want you to meet Tessa Vale." For 15 years, she was the executive assistant and primary confidant to your Aunt Laurel. I extended my hand across the table. Tessa took it, her grip remarkably firm despite the nervous energy radiating from her posture. She had kept completely quiet for years out of pure fear. My father was a vindictive man who routinely crushed former employees with crippling non-disclosure lawsuits if they stepped out of line. But after hearing what had transpired at the Harbor Club the night before, Tessa decided I finally needed the truth. "Your father thinks he is a brilliant real estate strategist," Tessa began. Her voice kept low to ensure absolute privacy in the bustling cafe. But he never understood what Laurel was actually buying down in Savannah. He looked at those crumbling brick warehouses and saw only urban blight. He thought she was wasting her capital on sentimental historic preservation. She reached into her oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a tightly rolled blueprint. She spread it flat across the scratched wooden table, weighting the corners down with our coffee cups. It was an intricate municipal zoning map, covered in technical markings. "The Savannah assets were never valuable because of the buildings themselves," Tessa explained, tracing a faded blue line that ran directly beneath the indicated properties. "Their true importance lies entirely below the ground. When Laurel bought those parcels over a decade ago, she aggressively secured the buried access easements and the deep trench fiber routing corridors beneath them." I leaned over the map, my extensive background in digital supply chain networks suddenly translating the archaic zoning codes into crystal-clear logistics. "She bought the choke point." "Exactly," Tessa said, a proud, fierce smile briefly cutting through her anxiety. "Without those specific, subterranean corridors, no large commercial redevelopment or data center project can legally connect municipal power, heavy water utility lines, and high-capacity communications across the entire district. Laurel owned the invisible veins of the waterfront. The massive developer your father is secretly negotiating with cannot break ground on a single server farm until they secure those exact underground rights." The sheer scale of the deception began to crystallize in my mind. This was not a simple smash and grab for a quick cash payout. This was a hostile takeover of critical infrastructure. Tessa reached back into her bag and hoisted a heavy, sealed archive box onto the table. The sturdy cardboard was reinforced with thick shipping tape, and my full name was written across the top in my aunt's elegant, looping handwriting. "Laurel gave this to me exactly 5 months before she passed away," Tessa said, her voice catching slightly. "She gave me one very specific, unbreakable instruction. I was only to give it to you if your family ever backed you into a corner, demanding you sign away something you did not fully understand. I think an emergency release agreement qualifies." I pulled a pen from my pocket and sliced cleanly through the heavy tape. Inside, the box smelled faintly of dry paper and dried lavender. It was a meticulously organized war room reduced to manila folders. I found original property survey maps heavily annotated in sharp red ink, dense correspondence with elite land use council, and thick stacks of private, handwritten notes. I opened a thick folder labeled explicitly with my brother's name. Inside were desperate, pleading emails from my father to Laurel, begging her to release equity from the maritime holdings to cover Mason's catastrophic commercial business failures. Attached to those emails were Laurel's drafted responses, flatly refusing him every single time. Her meticulous notes documented how she repeatedly and forcefully blocked Dean from using the strategic holdings as collateral for Mason's reckless ventures. She knew exactly what they were capable of, and she had built an unbreachable fortress to keep them out. Beneath the financial ledgers, I found a single, sealed envelope marked simply with my initials. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. It was a personal, 2-page memo, dated nearly 10 years ago. It explained exactly why Laurel had chosen me as the successor manager, completely bypassing her own brother and nephew. I watched you sorting some release files when you were just 19 years old. Laurel had written in sharp, precise cursive. While Mason complained about the heat and your father schmoozed the local alderman over expensive lunches, you sat in the back office for 8 straight hours. You were the only one in the entire family who genuinely cared whether the numbers on the page matched the reality on the ground. You have the mind of a builder, Alexandra. Dean only knows how to extract. I am leaving this to you because you are the only one who will understand its true structural value, and the only one strong enough to protect it. A hard, painful lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down, forcing my focus entirely back to the documents. The emotion would have to wait. I needed hard ammunition. I continued digging through the archive box until I pulled out a heavy legal binder bound in dark green leather. It was a highly specialized historical preservation trust agreement. As Nathan and I reviewed the dense clauses together, the final, most devastating piece of the entire puzzle fell perfectly into place. "My God," Nathan whispered, his index finger stopping dead on a highly technical addendum buried near the back of the heavy binder. "Look at the parcel identifiers right here." "What is it?" I asked, rapidly scanning the dense legal jargon. "There is an additional parcel," Nathan explained, his eyes wide with genuine professional awe. "A tiny, seemingly useless strip of land tied directly to the very center of the utility corridor. But Laurel did not just register it under the primary holding company. She hid it completely behind this incredibly rigid historical preservation trust agreement. Dean likely never bothered to read this far down into the archives. He blindly assumes the main holding company has blanket authority over the entire map." I stared at the paperwork, the strategic brilliance of my late aunt shining brilliantly through the complex legal text. If my father does not control this specific, hidden trust, he does not control the central parcel. And if he does not control the central parcel, Nathan finished, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his usually stoic face, he cannot legally grant the developer the continuous utility access they desperately need. His entire negotiation is built on a massive, structural lie. He is selling an empire he literally cannot deliver. I sat back against the worn vinyl booth, staring at the scattered documents covering the table. The real battlefield was suddenly violently clear. My family was not merely trying to cut me out of some sentimental inheritance out of petty greed. They were desperately trying to secure total, unquestioned control of vital infrastructure that could reshape the entire regional economy. They had promised a massive corporate developer the keys to the kingdom, completely unaware that Laurel had given the true master key directly to me years ago. They thought they had trapped me. They thought I was a naive, exhausted software engineer who could be bullied by a few forged papers and a stern, parental voice in a fancy club. But sitting in that coffee shop, armed with a cardboard box of absolute truth, I realized they had made a fatal, irreversible miscalculation. They had dragged me into a war over logistics, leverage, and hidden structural weaknesses. They had dragged me into the exact environment where I spent the last 7 years learning how to completely destroy my competition. At precisely 7 o'clock the next morning, my phone began vibrating against my nightstand with a frantic, unrelenting rhythm. I had barely slept, my mind a churning engine of legal statutes and logistical counteroffensives. I reached for the device, expecting a morning update from Nathan. Instead, the screen was flooded with text messages from former colleagues and venture capital acquaintances. Every single message contained a variation of the same question: "Are you okay?" One of my early investors had forwarded a link to a prominent local business gossip website. The headline was a masterclass in character assassination. It read, Asterloop founder faces reckless personal financial crisis amidst sale rumors. I sat up, the cold morning air biting through my thin shirt, and tapped the link. The article was a devastatingly precise hit piece. It did not mention my family by name, but it painted a picture of a brilliant, erratic woman who had completely isolated herself from her support systems. The anonymous source claimed my company sale had quietly collapsed behind closed doors due to my own unstable leadership and severe, undisclosed personal debts. It framed me as a tragic liability, a woman entirely dependent on the quiet, responsible grace of her wealthy family to keep her out of bankruptcy court. The article contained highly specific details about my apartment lease structure and my personal banking routines. These were granular, mundane facts that only two groups of people possessed: the executive team at Asterloop and the family office managed by my father. They had completely stopped pretending to negotiate. They were now actively engaging in public reputational warfare. 30 minutes later, Nathan called. His voice lacked any morning pleasantries. "They are hitting us on multiple fronts," Nathan said, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background. "I just received an urgent email from the lead acquisition partner at the firm buying Asterloop. Your brother, Mason, bypassed their corporate counsel entirely and sent a private, direct message to the buyer late last night." I gripped the edge of my mattress. "What did he say?" "He tried to create a massive cloud of doubt about your reliability," Nathan replied, his tone sharp with disgust. "He suggested your mental state is currently compromised by extreme stress. He politely advised them to delay the final payout of your $20 million for at least 30 days, claiming he was acting in your best interest to ensure you did not make any reckless financial decisions during a manic episode. He is trying to choke off your capital. He wants you terrified, broke, and desperate to settle at home." "Did the buyer believe him?" I asked, my voice dangerously flat. "The buyer is a corporate machine," Nathan said. "They care about risk. They immediately flagged the message to their legal department. It slows down our final wire transfer by at least 48 hours while they verify you are not actually under a conservatorship. But Mason's interference is only the first strike. Check your inbox. Your father just fired a warning shot." I opened my email application while keeping Nathan on speakerphone. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a formal, aggressively worded legal notice from a high-priced family counsel my father kept on retainer. The document suggested I had verbally agreed to a broad financial restructuring during our meeting at the Baldwin Harbor Club. It claimed my sudden departure was a breach of that verbal agreement and formally warned me that I was jeopardizing shared family obligations. "He is creating a paper trail of a fictitious contract," I said, scanning the threatening language. "He wants to establish a legal baseline that I am the one walking away from an established deal." "Exactly," Nathan confirmed. "It is pure intimidation, but the most insidious part is what your mother is doing. Have you checked your voicemails?" I had ignored 3 missed calls from Celeste. I switched over to my phone interface and played the first message. Her voice filled the quiet bedroom. It was not angry, it was not demanding. It was a soft, wounded whisper, engineered to inflict maximum psychological guilt. "Alexandra, darling," my mother's voice cooed through the speaker. "Please call me back. Your father is terribly worried, and quite frankly, I am heartbroken. We only want to protect you from yourself. Please come back before outsiders make things worse. Do not do this to us. Your resistance is just cruelty at this point. Show some maturity, sweetheart, and let us handle the mess you made." I deleted the message before she could finish breathing her toxic performance into my ear. She was framing submission as maturity and my self-defense as a vicious attack on the family unit. "I heard it," I told Nathan. "What is our move? Do we sue the gossip site for defamation?" "No," Nathan said instantly. "That takes months and looks defensive. We strike at the root. We target the leak. I stayed up half the night tracking down the corporate shell entities your father uses. I found the incorporation documents for Marchline Redevelopment, LLC, the specific vehicle they created to handle the Savannah data center deal. I cross-referenced the listed managing partners and future strategic consultants. He paused, letting the silence hang for a fraction of a second. Travis Keene is listed on the advisory board, Nathan revealed. Your chief operating officer was promised a highly lucrative, multi-year consulting contract with Marchline Redevelopment, LLC. That was his payoff. In exchange for feeding Mason the exact details of your closing schedule and providing the internal corporate terminology they needed to make their fake release documents look legitimate, your family promised Travis a permanent seat at their new empire. The betrayal burned hot in my chest. A sudden flare of pure, unadulterated fury. Travis had sat across from me, drinking my coffee, discussing my future, while actively building the scaffold my family intended to hang me from. My first instinct was to drive directly to the Astorloop office, march into his glass-walled suite, and fire him loudly in front of the entire engineering team. But I pushed the emotion down, locking it away behind a wall of cold corporate realism. Yelling at Travis was a temporary satisfaction. I needed leverage. "Do not alert Travis," I instructed Nathan, my voice dropping into the absolute calm of a commander surveying a battlefield. "If we fire him today, he deletes his archives. I am still the chief executive officer of Astorloop Metrics. I have unilateral authority over our internal servers." "What do you want to do?" Nathan asked. "I am authorizing the acquiring firm's IT compliance officer to initiate a silent, forensic lock on Travis's entire communication network," I said. "Every email, every direct message, every deleted draft. I want it preserved, time-stamped, and transferred to your server by noon. We are not going to retaliate emotionally. We are going to quietly turn his opportunism into concrete evidence of corporate espionage. I will issue the preservation demands immediately," Nathan agreed, the satisfaction evident in his professional tone. "I will also send a confidential warning to Travis's personal counsel. I will inform them that any further interference with the transaction timeline will trigger a full federal compliance review. That will terrify him into silence." I ended the call and walked over to the large window overlooking the Denver skyline. The sun was fully up now, casting sharp, unforgiving shadows across the concrete and glass. Everything my family had done over the past 12 hours. The gossip article, Mason's sabotage, the threatening legal notice, the manipulative voicemails snapped into a horrifying, brilliant focus. I finally understood the architecture of their true strategy. They did not merely want my signature on a release form anymore. They were actively, meticulously constructing a permanent public and legal narrative. They were creating a detailed version of events where I became the unstable, paranoid problem, and they became the reluctant, responsible adults forced to clean up my mess. If they successfully built that narrative, no judge in the state would ever believe I was the rightful manager of a highly strategic real estate portfolio. They were building the exact profile they needed to execute the capacity affidavit package. They thought they were burying me under an avalanche of public pressure. They did not realize they had just handed me the exact tools I needed to dismantle them. By Tuesday afternoon, the defensive phase of my life officially ended. Nathan walked into my office carrying a heavily stamped document. It was an emergency records preservation order. He had successfully petitioned a state judge based entirely on the glaring inconsistencies in the notary logs and the highly suspicious chain of title discrepancies tied to Baldwin Maritime. The court mandate effectively locked down every filing cabinet, hard drive, and corporate server inside my father's executive office. They could no longer destroy the paper trail. While Nathan handled the courts, Tessa proved her immense strategic value. Using archived payroll records from Laurel's estate, she tracked down the retired notary whose official seal appeared on my alleged ratifications. Her name was Evelyn Vance, a woman in her late 60s, living in a modest condominium on a fixed income. Nathan and I arrived at her door unannounced. When Nathan politely but firmly explained the severe federal penalties for participating in commercial real estate fraud, Evelyn crumpled instantly. She did not ask for a lawyer. crying quietly at her small kitchen table. She admitted that my father's office manager had summoned her shortly after Laurel passed away. They offered her a cash bonus of $10,000 to backdate a massive stack of paperwork, assuring her it was merely a technicality to avoid lengthy probate delays. I placed my phone on the table and recorded her entire, tearful confession. The next morning, Nathan and I flew to Georgia to sit in the hushed, wood-paneled boardroom of the Savannah Historical Preservation Trust. We presented Laurel's archive box to the managing director. Buried deeply within the historical covenants was a trigger mechanism my father had completely failed to recognize. The director used a small knife to break the wax seal on a secondary side letter Laurel had filed more than a decade ago. Nathan read the text aloud, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Laurel had explicitly stipulated that any proven act of fraud, forgery, or self-dealing by any family member involving the Savannah assets would trigger an immediate, automatic shift of all operational authority directly to me. My family had never disclosed that letter during the initial estate transition because they knew their frantic, illegal attempts to protect the assets had actually activated the exact clause that permanently removed them from power. Armed with absolute documented authority, I requested a quiet meeting with the lead counsel for the data center developer. We met in a private business lounge at the airport, neutral ground for a corporate execution. The developer's lawyer was a sharp, aggressive man who clearly thought he was dealing with a minor, emotional family squabble. I did not raise my voice. I simply handed him a redacted copy of the historical trust agreement and the unassailable proof of the forged title ratifications. I calmly informed him that the massive commercial deal his client was chasing rested entirely on defective authority. More importantly, I showed him the municipal map proving my father's redevelopment vehicle, Marchline, completely lacked lawful control over the central utility access corridor. I watched the blood drain from the lawyer's face as he realized his multi-billion-dollar firm was about to wire hundreds of millions of dollars to a group of people who did not actually own the necessary land. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the developer formally froze all negotiations with my father, demanding direct independent verification of lawful control from my legal team before proceeding with a single municipal permit. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. At 6 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Mason. I answered, and the sound of his pure, unhinged panic poured through the speaker. He accused me of destroying the family legacy out of pure spite. He screamed that his luxury penthouse lease, his imported cars, and his entire revolving line of credit were tethered directly to the projected initial payout from the developer. His absolute rage only confirmed one pathetic truth. Mason was entirely dependent on a massive windfall he had done absolutely nothing to earn, and he was terrified of having to actually work for a living. I let him yell until his voice gave out. Then I quietly disconnected the call without saying a single word. Desperation breeds theatricality. That evening, Celeste deployed her final, desperate tactic. She sent a courier to my apartment with a handwritten invitation to a quiet reconciliation dinner at a highly exclusive private restaurant, begging for a chance to apologize and heal the rift. I knew it was a psychological trap, but I attended anyway. When the hostess led me to the private dining room, I did not find a quiet table for two. I found a meticulously staged moral tribunal. My mother had invited 4 extended relatives, my father, and the senior pastor from their affluent community church. They were seated around a massive mahogany table, ready to box me into submission using overwhelming guilt and public social pressure. As I took my seat, the pastor immediately launched into a soft, patronizing speech about forgiveness, the sanctity of the family unit, and the severe spiritual danger of harboring resentment over simple financial misunderstandings. My mother dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin, playing the devastated, heartbroken matriarch to absolute perfection. My father watched me with a smug, secure expression, entirely confident that I would never dare cause a scene or embarrass the Baldwin name in front of the extended family and the clergy. Instead of arguing, instead of defending my character or raising my voice, I reached into my leather bag and pulled out a small, high-fidelity wireless speaker. I set it in the exact center of the table, next to a floral arrangement. I synced it to my phone and opened my audio files. "I appreciate the beautiful sermon," I said to the pastor, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional fragility. "But before we discuss the concept of forgiveness, we should clarify exactly what requires forgiving." I pressed play. The elegant dining room filled with the crisp, undeniable audio of Evelyn Vance, the retired notary, sobbing as she confessed to accepting a $10,000 bribe from my father's office to forge my signature on commercial loan documents. I let the recording play to the very end. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I reached back into my bag and pulled out a stack of printed emails. I passed them around the table. They were the preserved internal communications between Mason and Travis Keene, explicitly detailing their highly coordinated plan to exploit my company's sale to force me into signing away my rights. I looked at my extended relatives, whose faces were frozen in various states of shock and absolute horror. The pastor stared blankly at his water glass, completely speechless, the patronizing sermon dying in his throat. I turned my gaze to my mother, whose theatrical tears had instantly dried up, replaced by a pale, terrified rigidness. Finally, I looked directly at my father. The smug confidence had completely vanished from his face, leaving only the hollow, sinking realization that his entire empire of lies had just collapsed in front of his chosen audience. "I am not the one who needs a spiritual intervention," I said, standing up from the table and smoothing the front of my blazer. "Have a wonderful dinner." It was 3 o'clock in the morning when I reached the false bottom of Laurel's archive box. The heavy canvas and cardboard gave way to a small, velvet-lined cavity. Inside sat a pristine, silver digital audio recorder. I picked it up, feeling the cold metal against my exhausted palms. I plugged in a pair of headphones, pressed the playback button, and closed my eyes as my aunt's voice filled the quiet darkness of my living room. Her voice was weaker than I remembered, raspy with the illness that eventually took her, but the iron clarity of her mind remained completely intact. She did not waste time with sentimental introductions. She was leaving a definitive, unassailable record of our family's original sin. "If you are listening to this, Alexandra," Laurel's voice echoed in my ears, "it means Dean has finally made his move. It means he believes he has found a way around the locks I placed on the Savannah properties. But you need to know the true origin of those assets. They were never mine, and they were certainly never his." She went on to explain the buried history of my late grandfather. He was a man who built his wealth not in glass boardrooms, but through sweat, steel, and shipping logistics. When he passed away, he left behind a highly specific financial mandate. He never intended for the riverfront holdings to become a private family jackpot. His absolute, recorded desire was for the eventual, matured value of those properties to fund skilled trade apprenticeships and local small business grants. He wanted to build schools for electricians, welders, and carpenters. He wanted to seed the next generation of builders in the city that had given him everything. My father and mother saw that vision as a grotesque waste of generational wealth. Laurel's audio detailed exactly how Dean and Celeste repeatedly attempted to repurpose the foundational assets. They desperately needed the capital to cover a mountain of hidden liabilities. There was the catastrophic debt from Mason's absurd, failed, fusion restaurant concept. There was the staggering luxury spending my mother insisted upon to maintain her status at the Harbor Club. There were high-risk financial guarantees my father had personally signed that never paid off. "They viewed our father's legacy as a private checking account," Laurel whispered through the recording. "I had to stop them. I spent 3 years quietly reorganizing the entire holding structure, shifting the equity, and building the blind trusts. I placed you at the absolute center of the final architecture. I chose you because I watched you build your own life from scratch. You are the only person bearing the Baldwin name who understands the fundamental difference between stewardship and blind entitlement." I sat on the floor until the sun came up. the weight of a generational war pressing firmly onto my shoulders. This was no longer just about defending my own $20 million. It was about protecting a dead man's dream from his own greedy son. By 9 o'clock that morning, Nathan arrived at my apartment with 2 thick briefcases and a grim expression. While I had been listening to ghosts, he had been dismantling my father's tax history. He spread a series of federal tax returns across my kitchen island. "Your family did not just forge your signature to secure commercial loans," Nathan stated, his voice tight with professional disgust. "They crossed the line into federal tax fraud. I started tracking the interest payments on the redevelopment debt. They were routing the capital through a registered charity, the Laurel Baldwin Memorial Foundation." I stared at the federal forms. My parents had used a memorial foundation, a charity explicitly named after the woman who despised their greed, to claim massive philanthropic tax benefits. Simultaneously, they were privately leveraging the related charitable assets as collateral for their speculative data center redevelopment scheme. It was a staggering, arrogant violation of federal law. "They are mixing tax-exempt, charitable structures with high-risk personal collateral," I said, tracing the routed funds with my index finger. "If the developer defaulted, the bank would seize the memorial foundation." "Exactly, Saz," Nathan replied. "And we are not the only ones who know it." He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. An email sat in his inbox from Judith Harlan, the family certified public accountant who had sat silently during my ambush at the Harbor Club. Judith was a survivor. Seeing the absolute exposure closing in and realizing the developer deal was completely frozen, she decided to save herself. She had formally turned on my father. She provided Nathan with dozens of warning emails she had sent to Dean and Celeste over 3 years ago. The documents definitively proved she had told the family that mixing the charitable foundation with their personal debt was catastrophic and highly illegal. Dean had ignored her, ordering her to file the paperwork anyway. The walls were collapsing on them from every side. By noon, the final pillar of their scheme crumbled. Travis Keene, my former chief operating officer, appeared in the lobby of my apartment building. He looked entirely broken. Mason had completely abandoned him the second the real estate deal stalled, leaving Travis exposed to the corporate compliance review I had initiated. Desperate to avoid federal prosecution for corporate espionage, Travis handed Nathan his unlocked personal phone. We scrolled through months of encrypted text threads between Travis and Mason. The messages revealed the final, most sickening truth. After I made the initial phone call claiming I lost my company's sale proceeds, my family did not just react. They immediately and intentionally coordinated the public narrative. Mason explicitly ordered Travis to leak the false story of my financial collapse to the gossip websites. They purposefully engineered the rumor that I had lost my $20 million to isolate me, destroy my professional credibility, and force me into their predatory legal trap. I now possessed the complete arsenal. I had the forged notary confession, the historical trust documents, the proof of charitable tax fraud, Judith's warning emails, and the digital text threads proving a coordinated smear campaign. I had enough hard, unassailable evidence not just to protect myself, but to entirely dismantle the false, polished narrative on which my family had operated for decades. I could send my father to federal prison. I could leave Mason utterly bankrupt. But as I looked at the black digital recorder sitting on my kitchen counter, the true moral complexity of the situation settled over me like a heavy shroud. If I handed this mountain of evidence over to the federal authorities and the public press, I would not merely punish their insatiable greed. The ensuing criminal trial and the public spectacle would completely destroy the Baldwin name. It would obliterate the public version of the legacy that Laurel had originally sacrificed years of her life to preserve. Exposing their crimes meant burning the entire house to the ground. I had to decide what kind of architect I wanted to be. Nathan sent the formal proposal for mediation on a Thursday morning. My father accepted the invitation within 2 hours. Nathan knew exactly how the opposition would interpret the request. Dean viewed the call for a sit-down as a massive white flag of surrender. He assumed the psychological toll of the public smear campaign, the frozen bank accounts, and the suffocating family pressure had finally broken my resolve. My father firmly believed I was still the fragile, emotional daughter who would gladly settle quietly behind closed doors rather than engage in a protracted, ugly corporate war. The mediation took place on a Monday morning at a neutral to high-end arbitration firm located in the financial district. I sat next to Nathan at a long, frosted glass table in a room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive leather. At precisely 10 o'clock, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. My father entered first, flanked by my mother, Mason, and a pair of highly paid outside litigators wearing bespoke charcoal suits. Dean wore the smug, relaxed confidence of a man who firmly believed that biological dominance would always override documentary evidence. He took his seat across from me, casually unbuttoned his suit jacket, and smiled a thin, deeply patronizing smile. He looked at me not as an opponent, but as a runaway child who had finally been dragged back home. His lead attorney did not even bother with standard opening statements or pleasantries. He reached into his leather portfolio and slid a single sheet of heavy stock paper across the frosted glass. It was a drafted settlement term sheet. My father leaned forward, clasping his manicured hands together, resting on the table. "We want to end this unnecessary pain," Dean said smoothly, his voice dripping with faux compassion. "We are prepared to offer you a one-time cash payment of $2 million to help you recover your footing after your startup failure. In exchange, you simply sign the broad releases we discussed last week, stepping completely away from the maritime holdings. We will even guarantee a minor advisory role for you down the line once you are stable. Take the money. Go start a new life without this burden." He genuinely thought I would choose a quick cash payout over a brutal legal fight. He thought he could buy the keys to an empire for pennies on the dollar by preying on my supposed desperation. I did not even look at the paper. I looked at Nathan. Nathan did not argue. He did not object. He simply reached down into his heavy leather briefcase and began placing thick, black binders onto the center of the glass table. The heavy thud of the first binder echoed sharply in the silent room. Then came the second. Then the third. Then the fourth. He lined them up with meticulous, terrifying precision. "Exhibit A," Nathan said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion, tapping the cover of the first binder. "Sworn, recorded testimony, and signed affidavits from your retired notary, Evelyn Vance. She explicitly details accepting a $10,000 bribe from your family office to backdate forged signature ratifications." The two outside litigators immediately stiffened. Lawyers detest being blindsided by their own clients, and they instantly recognized the scent of felony fraud. Nathan tapped the second binder. "Exhibit B. Concealed lender side letters proving you pledged commercial assets you did not legally own, violating municipal zoning laws and triggering massive institutional fraud." He moved his hand to the third binder. "Exhibit C. 3 years of federal tax returns and internal accounting communications surrendered by your own certified public accountant, Judith Harlan. These documents detail the illegal leveraging of the Memorial Foundation to shield your speculative debt." Finally, Nathan rested his hand firmly on the fourth binder. "And Exhibit D, complete digital communication logs between your chief operating officer and your son, Mason. This proves a highly coordinated, malicious campaign to artificially trigger a financial panic, leak defamatory statements to the press, and manipulate my client." The smug confidence vanished from my father's face, replaced by a pale, rigid shock. Mason let out a sharp, breathless sound. The blood drained completely from his cheeks as his eyes darted from the binders to his father. The reality of the situation crashed into him with the force of a freight train. "The bridge financing," Mason stammered, his voice cracking with pure panic. "The developer froze the bridge financing because of her, didn't they?" Dean tried to silence him with a sharp and furious glare, but Mason was entirely unraveling. "My penthouse lease is guaranteed by the redevelopment entity," Mason continued, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. "My credit lines are tied to the Savannah equity. If the holding company defaults because the developer walked away, the banks will trigger a cross-default on absolutely everything I own. I will be bankrupt by Friday. You told me this was handled. Seeing her golden child spiraling into financial ruin, Celeste slammed her hands flat on the glass table. Her composed matriarch facade shattered into a million pieces. "This is Laurel's doing," Celeste hissed, directing her venom entirely at me. "That miserable, bitter woman poisoned you against us. She fed you lies because she was jealous of everything we built. She hated this family, and now you are doing her dirty work just to punish us." Nathan did not raise his voice. He casually slid a certified transcript of the audio recordings across the table, placing it precisely over my father's pathetic settlement offer. He followed it with a certified copy of the Historical Preservation Trust's hidden side letter. "Laurel did not poison anyone, Celeste," Nathan corrected coldly. "She anticipated your exact predatory behavior, and she legally engineered a steel trap that you walked directly into with your eyes wide open." The outside litigators leaned over, rapidly scanning the dense legal text of the side letter. One of them slowly closed his portfolio, his expression shifting from arrogant to deeply alarmed. They knew a massacre when they saw one, and they knew their client had lied to them about possessing clean authority. I finally spoke, ensuring my voice was completely steady, commanding the absolute attention of every person in the room. "There is no negotiation happening today," I stated, staring directly into my father's hollow eyes. "I am offering you one extremely narrow path to survive this afternoon. By 5 o'clock today, you and Celeste will resign all claimed authority over any family entity. You will sign sworn affidavits admitting on the public record that all prior documents transferring those assets were completely unauthorized. You will immediately restore every diverted dollar to the Memorial Foundation. And you will stay permanently out of any decision involving the maritime holdings. If you do exactly as I say, I will let you walk away with your freedom." My father's face contorted into a mask of pure, stubborn rage. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling the water glasses. "I built this family," Dean snarled, his voice vibrating with absolute denial. "I protected our name for 30 years. You are bluffing. Alexandra, you would never dare drag our reputation through an open court and subject us to state review. The media would devour us. You do not have the stomach to destroy your own blood." He was so absolutely convinced of my inherent weakness. Even facing a mountain of evidence, he still viewed me as the little girl who would eventually fold to protect his image. Nathan leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, completely unbothered by my father's aggressive outburst. "You seem to severely misunderstand the timeline, Dean," Nathan informed him, his tone chillingly calm. "We are not threatening to file these documents if you refuse. I have already prepared the complete preservation packages. They are currently sitting on the desks of the State Attorney General and the Commercial Lender Fraud Unit. We instructed them to hold action until exactly 5 o'clock today. The clock is no longer in your control. Sign the resignations, or the federal warrants will be issued tomorrow morning." My father let the 5 o'clock deadline pass. He believed, right down to the marrow of his bones, that I would flinch. He firmly thought that when the sun rose the next day, I would call him, apologize for my dramatic behavior, and sign the release forms just to keep the peace. He was devastatingly wrong. Overnight, the entire family system began to violently break apart. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the commercial lender freezes officially hit Marchline redevelopment. The banks, terrified by Nathan's preservation orders, instantly locked every operational account my father managed. At precisely noon, the data center developer formally filed a devastating civil lawsuit for gross misrepresentation and breach of contract. Mason's artificial reality shattered in less than 48 hours. His luxury penthouse management company issued a brutal eviction warning. His imported sports car was flagged for immediate repossession, and his premium credit cards were publicly declined at the Harbor Club bar. The financial obligations he had built his entire fantasy life upon were suddenly unstable, and he had absolutely no safety net left to catch him. The emergency injunction hearing took place 3 weeks later in a cold, modern downtown civil court. My father arrived flanked by an entirely new legal team. His lead defense attorney stood before the judge and immediately attempted to reframe the entire case. He painted a masterful, deceptive picture of an ugly, deeply emotional family disagreement. He used words like resentment, estrangement, and tragic generational misunderstanding. He desperately wanted to blur the sharp, undeniable lines of commercial fraud into the murky, subjective waters of a family dispute, hoping the judge would simply mandate private family counseling and force a quiet financial settlement to protect the municipal development project. Nathan did not let the water get muddy. When it was his turn to speak, he kept the case brutally, beautifully simple. He did not talk about my feelings. He did not mention my broken heart. He talked about dates. He stood before the bench and methodically walked the judge through the forged signatures, cross-referencing the notary stamps with my international travel records. He presented the false authority my father had claimed, the undisclosed side letters proving Laurel's true intent, and the blatant charitable misuse of the Memorial Foundation. Finally, he presented the digital communications proving a coordinated, malicious attempt to pressure me into signing away my rights under a completely false financial narrative. The judge, a severe woman with decades of complex commercial litigation experience, zeroed in exactly where Nathan wanted her to. She focused entirely on the backdated notary documents and the concealed succession clause. But the detail that seemed to anger her the most was the sheer hypocrisy of their timing. She pointed out that my father's legal team had repeatedly acted as though my consent was completely unnecessary for years, forging my name in the shadows whenever it suited their leverage needs. Yet, the exact moment they believed my $20 million had vanished, they suddenly treated my signature as the most urgent, necessary requirement on earth. It was my mother who broke first. When the judge directly questioned her about the emergency release drafted on the night of my fake financial collapse, Celeste's polished, country club armor cracked wide open. She began to cry, but they were not tears of genuine remorse or maternal regret. They were tears of pure embarrassment. She admitted, on the permanent public record, that they had simply assumed I would sign the documents to protect the family image. They truly believed I would rather surrender my inheritance than force a public legal scrutiny into financial records no one in high society wanted opened. My father tried to salvage his dignity, standing up to claim he was only trying to centralize the estate management for my own protection. His version of reality collapsed entirely when Nathan entered Dean's own internal emails into evidence, explicitly proving Dean planned to use the developer payout to cover his massive personal debts and fund Mason's lifestyle. The ruling was swift, absolute, and merciless. The court officially recognized me as the sole, lawful manager of Baldwin Maritime Holdings. The judge signed a sweeping, permanent injunction removing my family from any operational, strategic, or financial authority over the assets. I walked out of that courtroom holding the absolute power my family had tried to steal. But instead of turning the victory into a petty, personal corporate takeover, I chose to be the architect my Aunt Laurel knew I was. I immediately restructured the holding company according to her original, hidden vision. I monetized a strategic portion of the riverfront value, selling the utility access easements to the developer at a massive, unassailable premium. But I did not absorb that capital into my own tech portfolio. I used it to entirely rebuild my grandfather's Memorial Foundation. Within 6 months, we were funding heavy machinery apprenticeships, providing massive grants to local small businesses, and financing vital neighborhood preservation projects. Mason permanently lost access to the fantasy life he had built on pure entitlement, without his father's stolen equity to prop him up. He was forced to move into a modest apartment and look for an entry-level hospitality job. My father and mother managed to avoid federal prison through a highly complex, humiliating financial settlement with the state attorney general, but they were left with something far more painful to them than a jail cell. The reputational damage was absolute. They were quietly asked to resign from the Baldwin Harbor Club. Their wealthy friends completely stopped returning their calls. They became social pariahs in the exact circles they had sacrificed their own daughter to impress. Our final interaction happened in the marble hallway just outside the courtroom, right after the judge handed down her ruling. My father and mother stood near the elevators, looking older, smaller, and entirely defeated. I walked up to them. I did not yell. I did not gloat. I simply looked at the two people who had brought me into the world and told them the one truth they still did not understand. The $20 million was never the point, I said quietly, watching my father's jaw clench tightly. The moment you believed I had nothing left, the moment you thought I was broken and desperate, you revealed exactly what you had always been protecting. And it was never your daughter. I turned and walked toward the glass exit doors, my heels echoing sharply against the polished stone floor. I did not walk away as the terrified woman who had lost a fortune. I walked away as the woman who finally understood what my lawyer had known from the very start. The real inheritance was never the warehouses, the money, or the land. The real inheritance was control, absolute clarity, and the permanent right to stop asking my family for permission to exist. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Where are you tuning in from right now? Please leave a comment below so we can connect and share our thoughts on this journey. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Amelia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us even more by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.